Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and this right here that you're looking at is my PSP. This is specifically a PSP 2000 model, and I'm showing this here because the PSP is still a system that I absolutely know, love, and it's done a whole lot for me in terms of getting into modding and really kind of staying there as well too. But I was really happy to see that there is a firmware out, and although pretty much any PSP owner should be familiar with at least the idea of custom firmware, I was so happy to see that there's been development for years on a new and current custom firmware by the name of ARK. Now, for anybody who does not know, ARK is a custom firmware and even a e-custom firmware for both the PSP and the PS Vita. However, to my understanding, when the fourth version, ARK-4, ended up coming out, this ended up bringing about support for the PSP itself. So it was actually custom firmware for the PSP that could run on the PSP. And it's really cool because unlike other custom firmwares such as LME, ME, or Pro, this one is not only still maintained, you can see even in the current year it is being maintained, but there's plenty of new options, features, and customizations and optimizations on ARK which are not present on older custom firmwares. So this here I'm going to be showing you all, if you have a stock PSP, how you can update it to the latest official firmware if it has not been updated, and on top of that, how you could also install the ARK custom firmware on here. Now, we are going to be going through the installation on PSP instructions, so if at any point you get confused, you can go ahead and pause the video, rewind, do what you need to, but there's also written instructions on the GitHub repository, which will be linked down below in the description. This is a nice permanent custom firmware. It does not rely on Infinity, and it has been pretty good when I've been using it here. So that's why I'm kind of sharing the love with you all, and we're going to just be looking at something pretty cool for the PSP. Oh, and for anybody who might be wondering, don't worry, near the end of the video, I'm going to be showing you all how you can set up your applications, games, all that fun stuff on here as well too, just where they go, so you're not just going to be dead in the water right after you install custom firmware. Either way, you are going to need a few things. First of all, you are going to need a PSP. This can be any model of the PSP. That means a 1000, 2000, 3000 Street, or even a PSP Go. It can be from any region. This here is a Japanese PSP 2000 that we're going to be performing this on. Secondly, you will need a charged battery, and it will be highly recommended to plug it into power during this process as well too. And finally, you are also going to need some storage for your PSP, unless you're running a PSP Go, which has built-in storage, because you are going to need a way to get files from your computer and the internet onto the PSP itself. And there's a few options here. First of all, right here, if you are using just a bog standard PSP, you could of course use the Memory Stick Pro Duo, or you can use one of these, which I do recommend. This is a Memory Stick Pro Duo micro SD card adapter, and therefore everything is going to go on the micro SD card itself. It is much nicer to get more storage, and it is a quite affordable option, so this is the route I recommend anyone go in the modern day. On top of this, you are also going to need a way to get those files transferred between your computer and your PSP, so whether you want to use an adapter on your computer itself, or if you want to use a mini USB cable, or even the cable that comes with the PSP Go itself, you are welcome to do that as long as you're able to get files from the computer to the PSP. With all that being said, let's actually work on doing that here. So first, we do need to do a firmware check, because this is going to be recommended to be on the latest 6.61 firmware. In order to do that, you can come over to your settings, go down to System Settings, and go all the way down to System Information. Now you can see here my system software version is 6.60, so it is slightly out of date, and I did that on purpose because we're now going to update this to 6.61. We can go ahead and exit out of here, and at this point let's go ahead and get all of the downloads we need on our computer and transfer everything that we need to. The first download that we absolutely need is going to be the ARK-4 Custom Firmware. This is going to be linked down below in the description, and I would recommend you not only browse the wiki itself, but also look at the features and other things here on the GitHub repository itself. Once you've given this a sufficient read, you can come up here and you're going to click on the latest release right here. And once you click on this release itself, it's going to have some extra notes, change logs, things like that you can go ahead and give a quick read. but you're going to want to download the latest ARK-4.zip file. Save that somewhere you can easily find it. The next thing is going to be our official system firmware, and this one is only if you need to update to 6.61. If you're already on 6.61, don't worry about it, but if you're on a lower firmware, let's go ahead and get you up to date. For this here, we're going to use Darth Sterney's firmware archive, and it might look a little bit confusing, but trust me, it's very simple right here. So let's just simplify this the best we can. If you have a PSP Go, you're going to want to download the PSP Go 6.61 firmware. At the time of recording, the mega links don't seem to work, but the archive ones do. However, if you have a PSP that is not a Go, so that means a 1000, a 2000, a 3000, or a Street, you're going to want to download the standard 6.61. So again, if you have a Go, download the Go firmware. If you do not have a Go, download the standard firmware. Glad we got that out of the way. Since I'm going to be performing this on a PSP 2000, I'm going to download the PSP official firmware, just the standard one. You can go ahead and download this and save it somewhere you can easily find it. And if you are going to be updating the system firmware itself, you're going to want this MD5 file checksum webpage right here. I'm going to have this again linked down below in the description. Just keep it up and running. We're going to need it in a little bit. All right, so you can see we're back over at the PSP because we need to get our storage connected. Now, whether you want to pull this out or whether you want to just go over to settings, go to USB connection, tap into there, and then hook this up through mini USB, that is up to you. I'm going to be going this route here, so I'm just going to let my PSP be, and we're going to go back to our PC. Now, if you're on the latest firmware, you should have ARK-4.zip, but if you need to update, you should have a 6.61 PBP or a 6.61 Go.pbp, depending on which system you have. Again, I have a 2000, so I'm going to be using the 6.61, just the standard firmware. Let's go ahead and get the firmware update out of the way. This is the official Sony firmware. For this, make sure you have your PSP storage plugged in. For this, you can go ahead and navigate to wherever your PSP storage is at, and within the storage itself, go into the PSP folder. If you don't have it, create it, and inside of here, go into the game folder. Again, if you do not have it, create it. Inside of the PSP and game folder, right-click and create a new folder. In all uppercase one word, we're going to call this update. And inside of the update folder, we're going to grab our 6.61 PBP or the 6.61 Go PBP and copy it into this update folder. Go ahead and give it a few moments. That should be done. At this point, let's go ahead, close out of here, and we're going to make sure that download and copy over is good. For this, go back over to the firmware archive and grab the MD5 hash of whichever firmware you downloaded. Again, if you have a PSP Go, you're going to want the Go firmware hash. And if you do not, get the standard firmware hash. You can just double click this, right click, and copy it out. From here in the MD5 file checksum page, go ahead and click here, and you'll want to navigate over to your PSP's storage, PSP, game, update, and grab that PBP file. Double click it, wait a few moments for it to hash, and it should generate a hash string for you, which is that. From here, what I like to do is open up a notepad document and then paste in that MD5 file hash and then just compare it real quick. Now, it is not case sensitive, so if like BE is uppercase or lowercase, it does not matter, but the characters and numbers have to match. So as you can see here, my output is matching what the expected output should be. So from here, we can close out of Notepad and we can close out of the firmware archive as well as the file checksum page, because this means we have downloaded and copied over the file successfully and it's not corrupted. This is going to be a very important step though if you're updating, and don't forget this. You need to go over to your storage, PSP, game, update, and within here, you need to right click this PBP file, rename it, and we're going to call it all uppercase eboot. It must be eboot.pbp. And if you need to check the file name extension on Windows, click on View, Show, and enable file name extensions. This is exactly how it needs to look. Now that part is done, thankfully, so we can go ahead and work on getting the custom firmware copied over to our PSP storage. When you find this ARK-4.zip, you're going to want to right-click it and use your favorite extraction software. I personally use 7-zip and extract it into its own ARK-4 folder. It should generate a folder called ARK-4 in which you can double-click this folder, and it should look a little like this. Now I'm going to bring this over here, and on the side I'm going to have my PSP storage pulled up. So there's going to be a few file copies we need to perform. The first one we're going to need is ARK_01234. Right click this folder, copy it out. Within your PSP storage, go to PSP, Save Data, right click and paste right here. And it should now copy over that new save data. Now we can exit all the way to the root of the PSP storage, and the next thing we need is ARK Loader. Right click and copy out ARK Loader. Now in the PSP storage, go to the PSP folder, Game, right click and paste in ARK Loader. Back over on the ARK-4 folder, navigate into the PSP directory, and we need the ARK_cIPL folder. Right click, copy this out, and then right click and paste it into the PSP game folder. And the last thing we need is the ARK full installer. The exact same thing as all the other ones. Copy and paste it. This is how your game folder should look. The update folder might be optional, but you need the ARK Loader, cIPL, and full installer since we're going to be doing a full flash installation. The last thing we're going to need here is going to be optional, but I'm going to go ahead and show you this. On the root of your PSP itself, we're going to copy over some themes for the alternate custom launcher that ARK-4 has. You should be able to find a themes folder right here. Right click and copy this, and you can put it anywhere on your PSP storage. I just like to put it in the root, and I'm going to right click and paste this right here. It's going to be right now about 15 megabytes, give it a few moments, and once that's copied out, congratulations, you've done all the file copies you need to in order to update and install custom firmware. So we can go ahead and close out of ARK-4, come back out here, right click, eject our PSP storage, and navigate back over to the PSP. Over at the PSP itself, you can go ahead, disconnect your PSP from your USB cable, and now exit out of here. At this point, let's work on getting the firmware updated. So this is only going to be for people who need to update to firmware 6.61. Again, you can check that by going to System Settings, go to System Information, and if your firmware is lower than 6.61, then you're going to need to run through this step. Don't worry, it's pretty easy. From here, navigate all the way to Game, go down to Memory Stick or whichever storage you are using, and we're going to need the PSP update version 6.61. Go ahead and tap this to run it like any other PSP application. It will take a little bit to get going here, so if your memory stick is just flashing and you're not seeing anything on screen, just wait. But from here, we can go ahead and start this. We can agree to the terms here once they come up. And at this point here, once we start the update process, you're going to want to leave your PSP alone for a few minutes. Put it down gently, do not touch it, and let it update the firmware itself. Once you're ready to do that, tap the X button, and you should see the progress bar right here. If you're running into an issue where this is not able to install, you need to make sure you have a charged battery. And when you charge your battery, it is still recommended to have it plugged into power. You can see I'm not doing this here, and that's because, well, I've done this enough times over the years that I'm trusting the process with what I'm doing, but you need to keep your battery charged. Make sure you charge it, and if you don't have a working battery, I'm sorry to tell you, you're going to need to get a working battery. But go ahead, wait a few minutes, don't touch this thing, just let it update. And here we go, once your firmware has been updated, you can now tap the X button. Your PSP should quickly shut to black right here, but don't worry, it's still going to be running. It is going to reboot, just let it do its thing, give it a few moments here. And as you can see, it has now been updated. Now if we go in and check that same setting like we did before, I'm going to come over to Settings, System Settings, and go all the way down to System Information. Check this out, it is now running version 6.61, which is exactly where we need to be. Once we exit out of that, the rest of this should be pretty smooth sailing, and we can now install custom firmware. So navigate over to the Game section, go to your storage, and the first thing that we need to run here is going to be the ARK Loader. Go ahead, tap the X button, and wait. You should see it's going to say loading ARK-4. It's going to go through this process of flashing a few files. It's then going to do a soft reboot, and after that, we should be able to load into the ARK-4 Custom Firmware. You can verify this because you can press the select button, and you should be able to see the VSH menu come up. So congratulations, you now have custom firmware installed. It was as easy as that. But it's not as fun as you'd expect because it is not a permanent custom firmware. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. Press the select button to exit back out, go back into your storage, and now go down to the cIPL flasher, and go ahead and give this a launch just like all the other applications. And here we go, once this launches, we are going to press X to install cIPL. Go ahead, tap the X button, give it a few moments, and it's now going to reboot your system in 5 seconds. Just do what it says, hold on to this, and wait 5 seconds. And once we get to this point here, we shouldn't have to touch anything. But as you can see, check it out, we were able to get our system rebooted. So it has been able to do a full reboot, and if we hit the select button, check it out, the VSH menu is coming up. But the last thing we can do, which is still going to be optional, but it's actually recommended here, is we can now do a full flash of the custom firmware. Just like before, it's going to be just as easy. We can go down to our storage under game, and we're now going to load up the final one, which is going to be the ARK full installer. Just like before, launch it like any other application. Once we get here, we just need to tap the X button to install this, and wait a bit. It's now going to flash a few more files, and then it's going to exit. So at this point, once it reboots, we are going to have a fully flashed custom firmware on our system. Now what exactly does this mean? We can go ahead and come over here, shut down the system itself, so the system is now completely powered down. And even to prove it to you all, I'm actually going to remove this, and I'm going to do a battery pull. So there's no way the system is in sleep mode. Now we can pop the battery back in. We're going to cover this up, and we're going to turn the system on. So that's all I'm doing. We can wait a little bit, and as you can see, it's firing off. We have our system up and running and working, and the last thing here is we can hit the select button, and you can see the VSH menu is coming up. Although I do need to set the date and time settings again because, well, I did a battery pull. So now congratulations, you have a full custom firmware installed on your system. You are running ARK-4 Custom Firmware, which you can verify by coming over to your system settings, going into the system information, and you can see right here, we got ARK-4 cIPL running on here. And we can even exit out of this, hit the VSH menu, and you can see the revision right here, which at the time of recording is revision 153 that I am running. Now there's going to be a few things that you can check out here because we're now going to browse through the custom firmware itself. First of all, you can go to the extras section, but do keep in mind if you have a PSP Street, you might not have access to this just because of the lack of internet and kind of just how the firmware files are. I'm not going to get into that here, but in short, I was able to run this on here, but I noticed on my PSP Street, this did not show up. But you can go to the custom firmware settings, and right when you're in here, you can go ahead and adjust your custom firmware settings to your heart's content. There are some familiar ones there if you've used custom firmware before, but there's also some nice new ones as well too if you want to check these out. The next thing is going to be the plugins manager, because do keep in mind that there are different ways to load up plugins on ARK-4. It's not anything difficult, but it is a little bit different than how it used to be. So it is a little different than the legacy plugin system, but that's fine. The next thing is going to be the custom launcher you can check out. And you can come over here, go ahead, give this a launch, and check this out. When you come in here, it gives you a little bit of a different menu, and typically if you have your memory stick populated, on the left you'll see your PSP ISO games, here you'll see your Homebrew and such, and on the right you'll see your PS1 games. Now you can tap the triangle button and you can go ahead and change and explore these settings on here, like your games, network settings, custom firmware settings, plugins, and you can exit this as well too. But if you want to install one of those themes that we put on, you come over to Files, and from here, you're going to want to navigate to the Themes directory, and you can pick whichever theme you want to install. In order to install a theme, you're going to want to go into the theme folder, find the theme.ark file, load it up, and go to Install. Wait a few moments, and as you can see, I'm going to go back over to Games, it has changed up there. So that's how you can use this extra menu right here, so to speak. But I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this because honestly, I just personally like the XMB more. That's just my own thing. Now, if we want to clean a few things up, we can come back over to our storage and we can now go ahead and delete all of these. So you can hit triangle and then just go in and delete. I'm going to do that because I'm not going to need these here at all. But once these have all been deleted, I'm now going to show you how you can actually load up Homebrew and games and such on here and where exactly they'll go. For that, go ahead and hook up your storage to your computer yet again, or go through the USB option. I'm personally going to be going through USB, so I'm going to do that, make sure it is connected, and we should be good to go at this point. So right here, you can see that I have my PSP storage hooked up to my computer, and I have a few folders and a file right here, and I'm going to break this all down for you. So you need to go into your PSP storage, and first of all, if you have a PSP game that has been dumped to ISO format, it could be ISO, CSO, DAX, there's several out there, but just in general, a PSP ISO. Not a PS1 ISO. It sounds random that I'm saying that, but I'll get to that. It has to be a PSP ISO. Mine is the game Daxter that I have backed up from disk, and I'll have a video showing how to do that as well. But what you want to do is on the root of your memory stick or your storage, you're going to want to right click and create a new folder. And we're going to call this folder ISO. It's going to be one word, all uppercase. Inside of the ISO folder, you're going to copy any of your PSP ISOs directly into that ISO folder. You can see mine is about 1.3 gigabytes, so over USB 2.0, it is going to take some time. Alternatively, let's go ahead and exit out of here, and while that's copying over and cooking up, we can come back over to the PSP folder itself, because this is where we're going to need to focus. Inside the PSP folder, you'll need to have your game folder. And inside of the game folder, let's say you have a PSP piece of Homebrew or an emulator or another program. Mine is PSP ident, for example. All you need to do is make sure it's in a folder like this. So within that folder, it needs to be named, and you're going to need the eboot.pbp, and the program is going to have whatever other files are there. They could be PRX files, there could be folders. If it is an emulator, you're probably going to have other folders and maybe a folder for your ROMs, whatever works. This is for any piece of Homebrew, including emulators. You're just going to copy and paste the folder directly into your game folder. And finally, if you have PS1 games, they're going to look like this. They need to be inside of a folder, and typically they're going to be packed up into a eboot.pbp file. So you cannot just take a PS1 ISO and dump it directly into your PSP. There's a process to convert it. I have a video covering that as well too. But once you have it packed up and ready to go, you're going to want to take your converted PS1 game and copy and paste it into the same folder. It's going to be the game folder. So we're going to go ahead and start that copy now, but just keep that in mind. So again, while these files are copying over, just as a reminder, for anything that is a PS1 game, a PSP application, or something such as a PSP piece of Homebrew like an emulator, it's going to go into the PSP directory, game directory, and this is where it will reside. If you have a PSP game disk which has been backed up to an ISO, you need to have the ISO folder on the root of your storage device, and inside of here, all your ISOs are going to go there. Alright, so I admit I picked the slowest option to copy this here, but as you can see, it is almost done. And once our file copy is done, at this point we can now right click, eject our PSP's storage, and the rest of the video here is going to take place on the PSP itself. Over on the PSP, you can now go ahead, exit out, you can go ahead and disconnect your USB cable, and I'm going to move that to the side in case you are using USB cable, up to you. But from here, we can navigate over to our game section, go down to our storage, and within the storage itself, you should be able to find a few things. First here, this one is our piece of Homebrew. This could be Homebrew, it could be an application, could be an emulator, whatever it is. To fire this up, just go ahead, fire it up like any other application, and wait a few seconds. As you can see, that's it right here. So this shows my information on this, and really this is nice to be able to, well, identify your PSP. I'm going to hit circle to take a screenshot because why not? And then in order to exit out of this here, I'm going to do that, press any cross to exit. Yeah, we can go ahead and do that there, and it's closed out. Awesome. That was more just a quick demonstration to show you all some Homebrew. We can go back in here, and if we want to play a PSP ISO, if you put it in the right place, it should show up like that. So we can just go ahead, launch this like any other game, and wait a few seconds. As you can see, it is loaded in, and the game is already showing up on screen, which again is Daxter. And if you have a PSP and you've never played Daxter, you are missing out, and I do recommend you give it a shot. It is a fantastic game. So as you can see, that is loaded in and working just fine. Now we're going to go ahead, exit out of here, and there's going to be one final piece that I'm going to be showing you all. This here is going to be for PS1 games, which are an absolute joy on the PSP. I had a lot of fun playing PS1 games on here. To do that, go back into your games, find your PS1 game. It might look something like that. And from here, you can go ahead and give that a launch. Now go ahead and wait a few moments, and as you can see, you should see the PlayStation logo pop up here, which is a good sign, but we need to wait for it to get past that, and then we need to wait for the game itself to actually load up. And here we go, the game has loaded up, so it is working, which is great news right here. And this is also Xenogears, so it's also just a fantastic game. Now, PS1 games do have some extra features, which you can hit the home button right here, and from here you can switch your discs, you can change controller settings, manage your memory card, check the other settings such as your screen mode, black level adjustment, volume adjustment, disc load speed. Go back here, if there's a manual you can check that, or if you just want to reset the game itself, you can do that here. I'm going to go ahead and exit out, because why not? So we're not going to be playing Xenogears right now, unfortunately, but that's just to show you all how to launch these games. there's one more thing I want to show you all with your new modified PSP, and that's going to be the recovery menu itself. So there's two ways of accessing it. One of the ways you can do it is through the VSH menu, in which you can press select when you're at the XMB, and you can check out the advanced VSH menu, in which you can make some changes right here, including probably needing to change how this looks because it doesn't look super great on camera. But I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go into the recovery menu and load this up. Wait a few seconds here and it's going to look a little something like this. And this is probably different than recovery menus you've seen on older custom firmwares. But the nice thing is, if you are ever in an emergency with your PSP, like you need to, for example, recover from a bad flash, you're able to do that here. There's a plugins manager. You can change your custom firmware settings in here. It's not going to look as fancy as it was on the XMB. And you can select which piece of storage you're wanting to mount on here. But also, there's another thing as well too, where you can go down to the Pro Shell. And this here doesn't look as fancy, but this is the type of recovery menu that should load up if you do not have your save data on there, or if you don't have your memory stick inserted in here. I'm going to go ahead, exit this, and we're going to exit this yet again. But that's how you can get to the recovery menu, but there's one more way of getting to the recovery menu. And again, this would be in an emergency in case, let's say, there's something that's preventing your PSP from launching properly and you need to launch a recovery. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the system off completely. So I'm going to shut down device from VSH. And in order to access that, you need to hold down the right shoulder button on the PSP, turn on the PSP itself, and continue holding this down. After a few seconds, you should be able to get into the recovery menu, and there you go. So if you've never accessed the recovery menu like that, congratulations, you've now been able to. So we can go ahead and give that an exit. Anyways, that is it for the PSP right here. Congratulations, you now went from a stock system to a upgraded, running the latest firmware, running the latest custom firmware with a cold boot and everything. It has custom IPL, it has a full flash. You're good to go at this point. You have a permanent custom firmware that is kept up to date and maintained. There is also a way you can actually update the ARK custom firmware itself, and I will have a video coming out about that. If you're watching this later, it will be out now, and I'll link it down below in the description. But you might want to pay attention to that because, like I said, ARK custom firmware itself is still updated and given nice new features, keeping the PSP fresh and still in rotation and carried around in people's pockets or backpacks. Anyways, that is about it for this video here. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.